Okay, hello everybody. So, we're almost done with lectures. We have this today, a guest lecture tomorrow, and a bunch of sort of lightning talks in the afternoon tomorrow, and that'll be it. So, and also, you guys should have already started working on your projects. If you haven't, really get to it. And as you guys are starting up, we figure you guys might get a lot of hiccups on a lot of small things, so we decided to put a project management 101 or how to start your project lecture. Okay, so the format this lecture is gonna be in is like, I'm gonna tell you guys a story of how 614 staff implemented your workshop app over this winter break. I'm going to be showing you guys some screenshots of some documents. If you guys just want to take a look at the documents, go to that link, capbook-design-doc, and you guys should be able to follow along. Okay, so before we start, just a disclaimer. This is how we work on this project. You guys can take what you want, take what you think is useful, and drop everything else. Every team kind of works on their projects ever so slightly differently. We're not enforcing any of this. We won't be checking you guys do any of this. But this is just kind of like good practices that we've found useful over the years. Okay, so we decide around like mid-November-ish. Like, okay, we need to rehaul our workshop applications because right now it's completely shit. So let's make a new one and make it good. And then we were like, okay, what should we do? And someone just kind of raised their hands and be like, let's make Facebook but for cats. We're like, sure, okay, it doesn't matter. The contrivance of the idea is not the point. It's about teaching you guys web development. So then we were like, okay, what does this cat book have to do? And we were like, okay, users of the app should be able to log in, and a very straightforward way of authenticating is Facebook, so let's use that. Users should be able to post stories and comments, and stories should contain text and / or images, and comments can only be text. So these are kind of just arbitrary things we decided on that we were like, okay, this is what we're gonna do, let's stick to it. And these were what we decided were our MVP features, like minimal viable product features, and anything below that line were features we thought would be beyond the MVP, which we could implement, but as you can see, we most definitely did not implement these, but it's fine. We got the most important part working, and that's what matters. So we were at some point considering making it possible for different users to add each other as friends and only show posts of your friends. If you guys noticed the Catbook Workshop app right now as it is, you can see every single post that's been written to the website, period. So as you add features, you might want to change some of the specifications to make your implementation easier for the time being and decide to improve those at a later date. Anyways, those are some other things we considered, but then were not MVP features, and honestly we just couldn't find the time to get to them. And once we decided what value the Catbook application provided its users, the value was ability to post stories and comments. We needed to figure out what technical features Catbook needed to have so that these values to the users were, possible. So we decided that we should serve web pages to the users using an Express server. And there's also going to be a Catbook API, so to speak, where we're able to get existing users' stories and comments, as well as post new comments, new stories, as well as create new users. This was what our API allowed its user base to do. And we also decided, okay, we need to store this information about the user stories and comments somewhere. Let's host it on MLab and hook it up to our Express server using Mongoose. Users will authenticate using Passport, and we will store images of stories on Amazon S3. Amazon S3 is a file storing and sharing service, for those of you who don't know. And finally, pages will be updated real time. What this means, you don't have to refresh a page to get new things appear on your page. It will automatically refresh parts of your page, as in like render new divs as you're not refreshing the page using socket.io. If you notice, the server-side features number 5 and 6 have not been implemented in your current versions of Catbook as of yet. So since the workshop Aaron worked on Friday, we didn't have any of those features. We will have those features by the end of tomorrow. We'll be introducing you guys how to store images on Amazon S3, as well as we'll be hooking up our app with Socket.io. And I think there's going to be also a deployment lecture. So everything here should be working by the end of tomorrow. Okay. And these were our server-side features we were supposed to implement, and the client-side features we're going to use Bootstrap for layouting so that our Catbook website doesn't look ugly as hell. And we're going to use Socket.io. So Socket.io is both the server-side and client-side framework because you need to be talking like that's just how Socket.io works. So we were like, okay, that's what we need to do. In summary, we figured out that technologies we needed to use were Express, Mongoose, Passport, as well as Socket.io and S3, which we'll be covering tomorrow. On the client side, we needed to do Bootstrap and Socket.io. It's kind of like a good way to like kind of internalize these things. Just keep it in the back of your head. Be like, okay, these are the things I am dealing with. I probably will not need to deal with anything else. And if I realize I do need to, just put those things on the list of things you need to care about. Okay, and that was step 2. Decide what technical features Catbook has. We just talked about that. Then we went to step 3. We created a design document. I just basically opened like a shared notepad thingy. And we decided on what pages we should create and what client endpoints should exist. So one of them was our homepage. This is the root page where all the newsfeed items show up, as well as the profile page, which shows individual users' profiles, as well as a login endpoint and a logout endpoint. You actually don't get to any pages by accessing those 2 endpoints, but by accessing them, you can like make your web app get into a logged in state or a logged out state. Okay. Then we also needed to decide what kind of API endpoints were needed. These are all just URLs that allow us to interact with the application. There's a very big difference between these two. This allows us to look at the application, look at what it looks like. And these endpoints allow us to change the application, change what data is on the server. To be honest, I'm like kind of lying because who am I only tells you whether you're logged in or logged out. And also the login and logout pages technically change the state of your application. So in that sense, these 2 distinctions are not as like ideal. We probably want to fix these down the road. Okay. But for the purpose of our lecture here, this is the design doc we have. Okay. And then we figure out how our data is related to each other. So in a sense, if you look at the slide here, these are the schemas for our Mongoose database we have. So user schema has name, Facebook ID, and last post, etc., etc. And this is like the more formal way of writing it. Doing that on like a text document is kind of difficult, so we just kind of went with this. But what this means is basically in our minds we have like these 3 different collections, Mongo collections, where the creator ID and creator name fields of a story correspond to user's ID and name fields. So a user can have several stories, and a user can have several comments. And also, a story can have several parents. No, sorry. A comment can have a parent, or a story can have several comments attached to it. Sorry. So this is kind of like how our data is structured. This will help us later to figure out how to get certain pieces of information. Let's say we have a story and we want to fetch all the comments for the story. What we do, we would query our comment database collection, and look for all comments with the parent that corresponds to the story's ID. This is how you would go about like looking at different parts of your collection and making like smart queries. You will probably need to like have some version of this thing either in your head or on paper so that you can like do a lot of nice things on your app very efficiently. Okay, and then we kind of did a structure of our code base, what's going to be where. We took very careful account into the specifics of this just because we were going to demo this app to you guys, and you guys should be able to look at our code base and understand what's going on. You guys, this would be overkill for you guys, but if you guys want to, this is fine. But this is just for the sake of being a presentable code base, basically. So you see the app.js is the entry point of the application. db.js and passport.js are configurations of the different packages, libraries we're using. Models is where we keep our Mongoose models. Views is where we keep our HTML templates. And API and views. So these are basically, the first one is referring to these endpoints. And the second one, views, is showing you what pages you should be able to reach. And the code that tells you that information is stored on these routes. And then we look at the client-side files, or everything in public. So you have the JavaScript files, API. This one gives you guys a get and post request, like helper function. Feed and navbar give you helper functions that help render the navbar at the top of Catbook, as well as the newsfeed. And index and profile are basically the ways you call these helper functions to render the newsfeed page as well as the profile page. And CSS has our CSS styling. So like it's kind of like very explicit on what is where. And finally, step 4, we kind of create actionables, basically a glorified to-do list of things you need to do for our web app to work. So in our version, we have these 2 columns, essentially. The reason this is handwritten is because I kind of did this last night. This was kind of in my head. I didn't really write this down, but depending on how you guys do, you probably want some sort of way to write this down. This is in some contexts, like in startup language, like startup land. These are called kind of scrum boards, where you have tasks you need to do and tasks you can't do. And what you do is you put each task on a sticky note and put it on a board. And once you're done, you take them and put it on the done pile. There should be like another column called done. But since this is like few things, you can just look at it and it makes sense. So a to-do list, right? In the to-do list, we have create home and profile pages. So make the 2 HTML pages. And if you haven't done that, you can't actually bootstrap and make it pretty because it doesn't exist yet. And we also need to write the client-side JavaScript for rendering stories and comments. Technically, this doesn't work without this being done, but like to some extent, you can actually parallelize this. And then you also need to supply the server endpoints for fetching the data that needs to populate this. And once these two work, you can actually work on the next step things, which are usually more complex. So we made this, and then we just started popping things off of the to-do list. Be like, okay, I'm going to do the first one, and once I'm done with that, I'm going to go move on to the second one. Meanwhile, you can do the last one or something. And during implementation, I realized that I needed to change the data model several times. Like in the process, I've probably changed it 3 or 4 times. Aaron probably changed it a couple of times as well until we eventually converged to the version of Capbook you guys have received. So the way these updates would be done on our side, implementing this, would be first thing, you actually update the design document so that it is what you want your app to be. It's not what it is yet. It's what you want it to be. Let me repeat that. Let me repeat that. It is what you want it to be. It is what you will implement in a second. The reason you do that is you tell ahead of time, before you've sunk too much work, that I am updating this so that my teammates know what I'm doing and they don't end up wasting time just because you did something else and you didn't tell them. This is actually the biggest point of teams just breaking down. You're just yo, you're doing it this way. And you decided during some meeting, you're like, okay, the data model for this should be this, and you should be giving me this JSON so that I can write the client-side JavaScript to render this JSON file. And then your teammate goes and does some server-side backend coding and realizes that implementing this in the exact format your teammate asked of is very inefficient. It'd be very slow. And then you're like, okay, if I do it this way and supply my teammate this information, a slightly different JSON, it'd be a lot more efficient and it would make a lot more sense. It'd be better coding, basically. And then you just kind of be like, oh, of course, that's the better thing to do. Just implement it. You're done. And after you're done, you take a 2-hour break. And during your 2-hour break, you forget and you fucking take a nap. And then you wake up next morning, and then you realize your teammate's actually been working on the old spec that you guys agreed on all night, stayed up until 5 a.m. He got a lot of headaches and finally got it to work, and you're like, oh, by the way, I changed that. This happens very often. So what you should do is, before you do anything, change the thing and then tell your teammate. If an argument happens here for you changing it, that's a healthy argument. And if the argument is prompted and you do have the argument, it's fine. It's fine. It's just a difference in opinion. You can have the argument, you can argue for 30, 40 minutes, and eventually you will decide what would be the better thing to do. And once you do that, you can move on. But if you swap these steps, what you're going to have is not just the argument, but also the salt of the person having sunk cost in what they did. And because of that, they're going to be like, shit, I already sunk 7 hours into this, and now you're giving me this shit? What is this? You do not want to be in that situation. Okay, so that was kind of a very broad, high-level overview of how you should approach your project. And now I'm just going to give you guys some episodes that will kind of contextualize some of these points and show you guys what actually happened. And these are kind of sort of didactic anecdotes that is a do's and don'ts, things that happen, will inevitably happen that you might have to deal with, sort of deal. So, episode 1. So I start working on Capbook over winter break, and this is what it looked like. Like, this is actually the cat book that you guys are using. So like, there's no users, there's just these alphanumeric long-ass text. These are actually your user IDs and the messages. The point of this is focus on what's important when you're implementing certain features. In all the honesty, in order for me to get implement 40% of your client JavaScript code that we wrote during Danny's workshop, like the big ass blob that you're importing in your from public, 40% of that code I wrote while looking at this thing. Like zero CSS, none. And this was enough. Actually, this was why it looks relatively clean, the code base. When you're working on a feature, you really should zoom in on it. Just zone out everything else, take a look at one particular feature, and only work on that. Forget about CSS. If you're like trying to get some, data fetching from the server, rendering, forget about all the CSS. Nothing, none of it matters. Just work on making the data fetching and rendering work. That's all you care about. It's hard to keep track of more than one thing when you're writing new code to implement a new feature. Like, when you're trying to render something you're fetching from the server, you're like, okay, I just need to make an HTML div element and dump all the data I just got it into this div, and I'll be done. That's very simple, very straightforward. Not much is happening. But then if you're like, oh, I need to put this into this bootstrap table in this manner, and for that to happen, and for that to be possible, I need to add these bootstrap classes, hook up these different things. That's a lot more on your head. You don't want to have that much, thought process when the thing you're working on is somewhere else. This kind of leads me to my next point. This is episode 2. At some point, this shitty UI I was showing, this looks really ugly, right? Started to make it very difficult to continue development. Like if you look at it, it's like kind of difficult where see where like a common thread starts, blah blah blah. Like I'm not sure if one of these hashes looks ever so slightly different, and because of that I don't realize it's actually a different user, etc., etc. And so the page is getting cluttered, and I couldn't see what was going on, and I needed to get a better grasp of how the UI is going to eventually look like, so that I can implement new features correctly, so it is in a sensical place. So I stopped procrastinating finally, and I actually got, opened up the Bootstrap documentation, made maybe 2-3 hours worth of, CSSing, very minimalistic UI, and changed it to something like this. It's a lot prettier, but at the same time, it's not something you will eventually end up in. It's just a intermediary styling. And what I'm trying to say is you can add temporary features if necessary, if that helps your development. If you're just trying to get something and it just looks ugly as hell and it's really hard to understand what is going on, just make some helper things. Make this temporary UI. This is not what it's going to end up looking like, but I know that this will help me implement more features. So designing a good look took me some time. I'm bad at Bootstrap. But now that I made this change, applying the change in the HTML and JavaScript and CSS was really, really easy. I just need to copy pasta a lot of things and just apply it everywhere. Whereas in here, I was just trying to get it to work, right? And now here, I just figured out how to apply these changes, and I just dump them. It's just mindless. The episode 1, I'm gonna bring it back up. When you're trying to implement a feature, don't think about the CSS, but once you're done, and you figure out the CSS, adding that CSS in is really easy. Okay. So, now episode 3. So my flight from home to Boston is like one layover, gazillion hours, and this was like on, I think I left on Friday before IAP, and we really needed to get more work done on this because we were like kind of crunch time. We need a lot of work to get done. So what I did was I did as much as I could, basically, popped as many things from this side of the to-do list so that this side moves over to this side. So now there's a lot more tasks that could be completed with or without me. So when I loaded up the app after I got off my flight, which was like 20 hours long, I see this. Okay, not the data. This is just Robert doing his thing yesterday. Just ignore the data. I'm pointing at the UI here, you know? Like, I mean, it's a lot prettier than whatever this is, right? Like, it looks like something. And actually, this is like very close to the final version you guys get. This is what I mean by unblocking yourselves. So like, the idea from here is, the way your development is gonna work is you have like lots of tasks, and these tasks block other tasks. So like, think of your development as these tasks get completed, and then these tasks are possible to be completed, so on and so forth. Oh god, this looks like a neural net, gross. Anyways, and eventually your final product is your final app. So if you look at this, if you're completing tasks that unblock as many other tasks, you're being productive. You can do something so that your other teammates can do more things. When you're like trying to decide what feature you guys should want to work on, consider this strongly. And that'll get you guys pretty far. Okay, episode 4. So, by this point, everything about our project was different. And by this point, I mean this. Like this point. I just got off my flight. The database models have changed. Example of this is what the database model used to look like when I first originally made this. And you know now that it looks a lot different. Owner is now called creator_ID. There's another field called creator_name. Common underscore IDs is no longer a thing. Like, these changes happen. And during this, the 4 people who were most closely working on making this app were always on the same page because we could refer to the design document and update it when necessary. So even though we were like working, on a 12-hour time zone difference, we still got work done and it still worked out pretty well. So there's like 3 things I want to say about this. The first one I already talked in earlier when I was talking about keeping your design document up to date. Actually, no, it's 2 things, and that's my second point. I'm bad at making slides. Keep good communication. Make sure you update your design document if you're using something like that, or at least if you're not, then you should tell your teammates what change you made so that you can be on the same page. But that said, it comes with like a slightly more nuanced thought of this as you want to be updating your teammates about updates, but you don't want to be micromanaging your teammates either. Your implementation of some helper functions, your teammates doesn't give a fuck. Like, what matters to your teammates is you took a task, you need to complete it, the implementation doesn't matter for the most part, and if it works, it works. Your teammate's not going to look through your code and see like, you wrote this for loop wrong. It's not going to happen. But if you're changing a spec, like what I mean by spec is you're changing what kind of inputs and outputs a function that produces, of a function that you're sharing with your teammates, it is important to tell them, no matter how many times you do them. If you find that you're changing the spec of a single function way too many times, you probably want to tell your teammate, be like, okay, this is giving me a headache, don't work on this. I'll tell you when I'm done. And then you know, go through like several dozens of iterations. Eventually, finally, you're like, okay, this works. And then you're like, yo, I'm done. Look at this. This is how it works. Now we can resume. Yeah. And number 2, which is number 1 on this list, I'm sorry, is design your websites iteratively. It's kind of like, if I put a corny quote, it's the journey that matters. When you're developing a web app or any software to begin with, oftentimes the first line of code, like the first 20, 30 lines of code you wrote is never going to be in your code base at the end of the project. It's going to be in a slightly different shape or form. You will have changed it. But the important thing is, if you had written those 20, 30 lines of initial code, you would never be able to come to the result you came. Think of it as you implement something so that it helps you implement the next thing, so that it helps you implement the next thing. In a way, by 5, 6 steps, the first thing you implemented would kind of maybe be irrelevant, but it was still important, the fact that you implemented it in the first place. Okay, and episode 5. And this is the last one. And so in making of these slides, I need to pull up older versions of the app to get you guys these screenshots of the website, first looking ugly, then looking mediocre, and then looking kind of decent. And I opened the repo of Catbook, the one originally we were working on, and I just typed that command, but I just put up some alias. And this is what I see. This is the log of all the commits we've made to our repository. And actually, that's the newest one, and it goes here, and goes here, and this is the oldest one. So you can see the first commit was initialize basic express app with MongoDB connection. And from here, I kind of just looked through these, and I was like, merge branch styling. This is probably the one where Rapine added the bootstrap. And I pull this commit, and I run the app, and it works. I'm like, great, I have a screenshot. And I was looking through here, and I was like, I think this is the one where implement stories rendering with comments. This is the one where I got the basic implementation, the ugly looking one down. And then I pulled another commit from here, and I got everything I needed. In your development, you guys will be like, oh shoot, that very complicated feature that we thought was unnecessary from 5 days ago, we actually need that code. I mean, we can rewrite it.